was the summer after my first year of college. A group of friends and I decided to go camping in a state park about 2 hours from home. We wanted to disconnect, spend a few nights under the stars, and just enjoy the wilderness. There were 5 of us total: me, my best friend Sarah, her boyfriend Mike, our mutual friend Jason, and Jason's younger brother Tyler. We all packed light, brought a couple of tents, some food, and a cooler full of drinks. The first day was perfect. We set up camp, cooked over the fire, and swam in the lake nearby. When night fell, we sat around telling stories, laughing, and watching the sparks from the fire float into the trees. I remember thinking how peaceful it all felt. I didn't know then how much that peace was about to change. It was our second night when I first noticed her. I had gotten up around midnight to use the bathroom, which in the woods, of course, meant walking a little ways away with a flashlight. The forest was pitch black, and the only sounds were crickets and the faint crackle of the dying campfire. As I was making my way back, I stopped dead in my tracks. About 20 feet away, between 2 tall trees, I saw the silhouette of a woman. She was standing completely still, facing our campsite. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe it was just the shadow of a tree, but as I raised my flashlight, the beam caught her face for just a split second. Pale skin, long dark hair, wide unblinking eyes. And then, she stepped back into the darkness, vanishing between the trees. I ran back to the tents as fast as I could. My heart was pounding so hard I felt sick. But when I told Sarah and Mike what I'd seen, they laughed it off. "You probably just saw another camper," Mike said. "Relax." I wanted to believe that, but something about her didn't feel normal. The next night, things got worse. We had all gone to bed, zipped up in our sleeping bags, when I woke to the sound of twigs snapping outside. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling our tents. I held my breath, trying to listen. The steps would stop, then start again. At one point, they were so close I swore I could hear someone breathing. I whispered to Sarah, who was half asleep next to me. She shushed me and told me it was probably a deer, but I knew better. Just as I started to calm myself down, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A woman's voice whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but it was soft, drawn out, almost like a chant. It circled the tent, fading in and out as the footsteps moved. I clamped my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. Sarah didn't hear it, or maybe she was too scared to admit she did, but I'll never forget that sound. The following morning, everyone noticed the footprints, dozens of them, pressed into the soft dirt around our campsite. Some were small, like from animals, but others were clearly human, bare feet, thin with long toes that dug into the ground. Jason joked that we were being haunted by Bigfoot's girlfriend. Nobody laughed. That night, none of us felt comfortable. We kept the fire going longer than usual, trying to stay awake. At around 2 a.m., Mike finally decided to crash, and one by one the others went to bed until it was just me and Jason still sitting by the fire. That's when we saw her. Across the fire at the edge of the trees stood the woman. She was tall, impossibly thin, her hair hanging over her shoulders. Her face was pale, her eyes catching the glow of the firelight. And she was smiling. Jason froze, the beer bottle in his hand slipping to the ground. Neither of us moved, neither of us spoke. Then, without making a sound, she stepped backward into the darkness. The firelight flickered, and she was gone. We should have left that morning, but for some reason nobody wanted to be the first to admit how scared we were. We convinced ourselves it was a local messing with us, or another camper trying to scare us. But the last night proved it was more than that. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of scratching. Long, slow scratches running across the fabric of our tent. I held my breath. Every muscle in my body tensed. The scratching moved around the tent, circling us. And then, I heard it again. The whispering. This time it was louder, more frantic. I could almost make out words, something like "come out" or "let me in." I wanted to scream, but fear paralyzed me. Sarah clutched my arm, and I knew then she heard it too. Suddenly the whispering stopped. Silence. Then from directly above us, a woman's voice sang a single high-pitched note, almost like a lullaby. It went on for what felt like an eternity before cutting off abruptly. The next thing I remember is the tent collapsing inward, as if something had fallen onto it from above. We screamed and scrambled out, tripping over each other in the dirt. But when we got out, the woods were empty. No one was there. The fire had gone out. The only sound was the wind through the trees. At dawn, we packed up and left without saying a word. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to admit what we'd seen. But here's the part that still haunts me. When we got back to the parking lot, Sarah gasped. On the back window of my car, drawn into the layer of dust, were 5 long vertical lines, as if someone had dragged their nails across the glass, and written just below them, in shaky letters, was one word. Stay. None of us ever went camping again. Back in 2014, I went on a solo hiking trip in the Appalachian region. I had been hiking for years, but this was my first time planning to spend 3 nights completely alone, deep in the woods. I wasn't reckless. I had all the right gear, a good GPS, a map, and I had told my family exactly where I'd be. My plan was simple. Hike about 10 miles in, set up camp near a river, spend 2 nights there, then head further up the trail to another site before looping back. The first day went smoothly. The trail was quiet, and I only passed 2 other hikers. By evening, I found a small clearing near the river, perfect for setting up camp. The sound of water rushing nearby made the place feel alive. I ate, read for a while, and then fell asleep to the sound of owls. Everything felt normal. On my second day, I explored off-trail for a while, trying to find some good photo spots. At one point, I stumbled across an older man sitting on a log, smoking a cigarette. He looked completely out of place. His clothes were worn and dirty, and he just sat there staring at me. I waved and said hello. He didn't wave back. He just smiled. "Be careful where you camp," he said. His voice was rough like gravel. I laughed nervously and asked what he meant, but he didn't answer. He just repeated it. "Be careful where you camp." I left quickly after that. Something about the way he looked at me felt wrong, like I wasn't a person, just an animal passing by. That night I cooked dinner and settled into my tent. Around 1 a.m. I woke up to the sound of voices outside. At first I thought maybe the man had followed me, but as I listened, the voices didn't sound normal. They were faint, layered, overlapping, almost like a crowd whispering all at once. I sat frozen in my sleeping bag, listening. The whispers circled the tent, moved away, then came back closer. I couldn't understand a single word. It was like being surrounded by a dozen people speaking all at once in low tones. Then, all at once, silence. When I finally gathered the courage to look outside, there was nothing. The forest was still, the moonlight barely filtering through the trees. But when I turned back to the tent, my stomach dropped. My entire campsite had shifted. The fire pit I built the night before was gone. My pack wasn't leaning against the tree where I left it. Even my tent. It felt like it wasn't in the same spot. As if somehow, in the short time I'd been asleep, everything had been moved. I tried to convince myself I was just disoriented, but deep down I knew something had changed. The next morning I packed up quickly, wanting to move on to my second planned campsite. But when I reached the trail, it wasn't there. I retraced my steps again and again, but the path I'd been following for miles had simply vanished. Where it should have been, there was only thick underbrush. I pulled out my GPS. It showed that I was exactly where the trail should be. But looking around, there was nothing but endless trees. For hours, I tried to push through the brush, thinking I'd eventually stumble back onto the path. But the deeper I went, the stranger things became. The forest looked wrong. I kept passing the same fallen tree, the same crooked pine. I marked a rock with my knife only to see it again 20 minutes later. It was like the woods were looping around me, trapping me inside. As the sun began to set, panic really set in. I was lost, running low on food, and completely turned around. I decided to stop and make camp before dark, even though I hated the idea. I set up quickly, ate a granola bar, and tried to keep my fire going. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I looked into the trees, I swore I saw movement. Shadows slipping behind trunks, branches swaying without wind. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. Heavy, slow, deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. That's when I saw him, the same man I had passed earlier. He was standing just beyond the reach of the light, grinning. His teeth looked too many for his mouth, sharp and yellow. He didn't say a word. He just grinned, and then stepped back into the dark. I didn't sleep at all that night. By the third night, I was in full survival mode. My food was almost gone, and no matter how far I walked, I never found the trail again. I kept ending up in the same places. That night, I built a small fire and sat with my knife in hand. I remember whispering out loud to myself, trying to stay calm. That's when I realized the forest had gone completely silent. No bugs, no birds, nothing. And then the whispers returned. But this time, they were right in my ear. Clear, distinct.
Stay. Hours. No leaving.
The voices overlapped, dozens of them, men and women, young and old. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. They were inside my head. And then, just like the night before, the man appeared again. Only this time, he was closer, just at the edge of the firelight, smiling, his head cocked to one side. He opened his mouth and the voices grew louder. I swear they were pouring out of him. I must have passed out from fear because the next thing I remember is waking up to daylight. My fire had burned out and the man was gone. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the side of a familiar trail. My pack was beside me. My tent and gear were neatly folded. Everything was back to normal, like nothing had ever happened. I hiked back to the parking lot in silence, refusing to stop until I reached my car. To this day, I can't explain what happened. Did I get lost and hallucinate? Was that man real, or part of whatever was in those woods? All I know is this: I'll never go camping alone again. A few years ago, my friends and I rented a small remote cabin in the mountains for a long weekend. We wanted to escape the city, get away from everything, and spend a few days hiking and relaxing. The cabin was perfect. Old wooden structure, creaky floors, a stone fireplace, and surrounded by dense forest. There was no cell service, which at first felt like a blessing. It was me, my boyfriend Eric, and two friends, Jenna and Mark. We drove for hours, packed all our food and gear, and arrived just as the sun was setting. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, and for a moment, I thought we had stepped into a postcard. We spent the first evening cooking, telling stories, and drinking by the fire. As night fell, the woods became almost alive with sound: owls, crickets, the distant rustle of trees. Around 11 p.m., Eric and I went outside to fetch some firewood. That's when I first noticed him. A man, standing at the edge of the trees, watching. He was tall, wearing dark clothes with a hood covering most of his face. He didn't move, didn't call out, just stood there. I nudged Eric, whispering, and he squinted into the darkness. "Probably just a hiker," he said, though his voice sounded uncertain. I didn't believe him. The woods around the cabin were miles from any trail. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined him standing outside, watching. Around 2 a.m., I was woken by the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the cabin. I peeked out the window. Nothing, just shadows of trees moving in the wind. Then I heard a low guttural hum, almost like chanting. My heart raced. I woke Jenna, who was closest to the window, but she was half asleep and just shrugged. The sounds continued for hours. By dawn, I was shaking, convinced someone had been outside the entire night. On the second day, we decided to go on a long hike, leaving the cabin empty for a few hours. When we returned, the front door lock was broken. Nothing inside was missing, but someone had been inside. Eric suggested it might have been previous renters, or maybe a deer had knocked something over, but I knew better. We were miles from any road, and the nearest cabin was over a mile away. There was no logical explanation. That night, we double-checked all the windows, reinforced the doors, and kept a fire going constantly. Around midnight, the worst happened. We were in the living room playing cards and trying to calm our nerves when a shadow moved past the window. Eric and I ran to the door, but it was locked. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it outside. He was there, standing just beyond the yard, staring at us. He didn't speak. He didn't move. Just watched. Then slowly, he raised one hand and pointed toward the cabin. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew it wasn't friendly. Jenna started crying. Mark wanted to call the police, but there was no signal. The man vanished into the trees almost immediately, leaving us frozen in terror. We didn't sleep that night. We took turns sitting by the fire, listening to every sound, every snap of a branch. Around 3 a.m., I heard whispering, faint, almost carried by the wind, saying something like,
"You shouldn't be here."
Then footsteps, crunching leaves, circling the cabin. Eric tried to call out, but no sound came out. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the flashlight. The beam rolled across the ground, catching his hooded figure for a split second before it vanished. When morning finally came, we packed everything as fast as possible and left. We didn't stop until we reached the main road. Weeks later, I checked the property online. The cabin had no record of previous visitors that year, no complaints, nothing unusual reported. But I can't forget what I saw. The man wasn't a hiker or a camper or a local. There was something unnatural about him. I've been camping in forests before, and after this experience, I can't bring myself to go back. I don't know what he wanted or why he targeted us, but I'll never forget those 3 nights. Every time I close my eyes, I see him standing at the tree line, hood up, pointing, smiling, waiting.